Gelasius Media.
In 476 CE, a Germanic military commander named Odoacer deposed the last Western Roman emperor, the teenage Romulus Augustulus. Though presented as a mere administrative change at the time, this event traditionally marks the fall of the Western Roman Empire. For the papacy, which had developed within the Roman imperial framework for over a century and a half, this political collapse created an existential challenge. The popes who led the church through this tumultuous period found themselves in territory no predecessor had navigated. A post-Roman world dominated by barbarian kingdoms with varying relationships to Catholic orthodoxy. Some, like the Franks, would eventually embrace Catholicism. Others, like the Ostrogoths who ruled Italy, followed Arian Christianity that rejected key Catholic doctrines. Still others maintained traditional Germanic religious practices. Today we examine how the papacy survived and ultimately thrived in this radically altered landscape. We explore how popes navigated relationships with new barbarian rulers, how they preserved Roman administrative and cultural frameworks within the church, and how they gradually established a more independent papal identity, no longer defined by its relationship to imperial power. This is the story of the barbarian popes, the leaders who transformed the papacy from a Roman institution to one that could outlast Rome itself. This is White Smoke, Episode 22, The Barbarian Popes. When Odoacer took control of Italy, Pope Simplicius faced immediate practical challenges. The institutional structures that had supported the post-Constantinian papacy, imperial patronage, Roman administrative systems, established funding mechanisms, suddenly existed in radically altered form or disappeared entirely. The papacy had to quickly develop institutional self-sufficiency, explains Dr. Kate Cooper, Professor of Ancient History at the University of Manchester. Administrative systems that had been integrated with imperial governance needed to function independently. Funding that had partially relied on imperial subsidies required alternative sources. Protection previously provided by Roman military forces now depended on diplomatic relationships with new rulers. Pope Simplicius and his immediate successors responded by consolidating church properties and administrative structures. Archaeological and textual evidence reveals continued maintenance of major basilicas, functioning charitable institutions, and operational ecclesiastical courts, despite political upheaval. This institutional resilience demonstrated the Church's capacity to preserve essential functions, even as the political framework around it collapsed. What's remarkable about this period is not that the Church changed dramatically, but that it maintained such significant continuity amid broader social disruption, notes Dr. Thomas Noble, Professor Emeritus of History at the University of Notre Dame. The papacy preserved literacy, administrative competence, and institutional memory when many secular structures failed. This preservation would prove crucial for Europe's eventual cultural recovery. This practical resilience rested on theological foundations developed in the preceding century. Augustine's influential work, The City of God, written after Rome's sack in 410 CE, had articulated a vision of the Church as a spiritual society distinct from any earthly empire. This theological framework helped the post-imperial papacy understand its mission as transcending specific political arrangements, providing intellectual justification for continued ecclesiastical development despite imperial collapse. Pope Gelasius exemplifies the diplomatic skills required for papal survival in the post-Roman world. During his pontificate, Italy was ruled by the Ostrogothic King Theodoric, an Arian Christian whose theological position the Catholic Church considered heretical. Despite this fundamental religious disagreement, Gelasius established a working relationship with Theodoric. The Ostrogothic king, though maintaining Arianism for himself and his Gothic followers, generally allowed the Catholic Church to operate without interference. He recognized the practical value of maintaining established religious structures that served the majority of his subjects. Gelasius navigated this delicate situation by articulating what became known as the two swords doctrine, the concept that spiritual and temporal authority should remain distinct yet complementary. In a famous letter to Emperor Anastasius in Constantinople, with whom Gelasius had significant disputes, he wrote, "To there are, august emperor, by which this world is chiefly ruled, the sacred authority of the priests and the royal power." Gelasius's theoretical separation of spiritual and temporal spheres provided a framework for the Church's coexistence with non-Catholic rulers, explains Dr. Bronwyn Neal, Professor of Ancient History at Macquarie University. By distinguishing between political submission required in secular matters and spiritual authority in religious affairs, he created space for the papacy to maintain its essential independence while acknowledging new political realities. This Gelasian principle would guide papal diplomacy for centuries to come, particularly in relationships with rulers whose actions or beliefs conflicted with church teaching. The distinction between necessary political accommodation and non-negotiable spiritual positions allowed popes to maintain institutional functionality without compromising core doctrinal commitments. Gelasius further strengthened the papacy's position by systematizing church law and administrative procedures. His collection of official documents, liturgical instructions, and administrative guidelines helped standardize church governance throughout territories no longer unified by imperial rule. These practical measures ensured institutional continuity despite political fragmentation. As traditional Roman civil structures declined, the papacy increasingly assumed responsibility for preserving classical knowledge, administrative systems, and cultural forms. Pope Symmachus exemplified this preservation role through extensive building programs and document collection efforts that maintained Roman architectural and literary traditions. The papacy became the primary institutional repository of Roman civilization in the West, notes Dr. Julia Smith, Professor of Medieval History at the University of Oxford. Papal chancery practices preserved Roman documentary traditions. Church architecture maintained classical forms. Ecclesiastical education continued emphasizing traditional liberal arts. Through these preservation efforts, the Church became not just a religious institution, but the guardian of Roman cultural memory. This preservation had practical dimensions beyond mere cultural continuity. Roman administrative techniques, record-keeping systems, property management approaches, organizational hierarchies, provided effective tools for church governance amid broader social breakdown. By maintaining these practical traditions, the papacy developed administrative capabilities that would later enable its expanded medieval role. The preservation of Roman universalism particularly influenced papal development, where the empire had created a trans-regional identity transcending local affiliations. The post-imperial papacy increasingly presented itself as the institutional embodiment of universal Christianity, transcending emerging national divisions. Papal correspondence from this period consistently emphasized the Church's supra-ethnic character, rejecting identification with any particular barbarian kingdom. This Roman memory functioned both practically and symbolically. Practically, it maintained governance techniques essential for institutional effectiveness. Symbolically, it positioned the papacy as the legitimate inheritor of Roman authority, not in strictly political terms, but as the guardian of Roman civilization's achievements and universalist aspirations. While the Western Empire had collapsed, the Eastern Empire, later known as Byzantine, continued from Constantinople, creating complex challenges for the papacy. Officially, popes remained imperial subjects, as Italy was theoretically still part of the empire, despite being under Ostrogothic control. This ambiguous position required careful navigation between Constantinople's claims, barbarian realities, and papal independence. Pope Hormisdas demonstrated the diplomatic complexity of this position. When Emperor Anastasius in Constantinople supported positions the papacy considered heretical, the monophysite controversy regarding Christ's nature, Hormisdas maintained firm doctrinal opposition while avoiding political rebellion. After Anastasius's death, Hormisdas negotiated with the new emperor Justin I to heal the resulting schism between Eastern and Western churches. The papacy developed a sophisticated approach to imperial relations during this period, explains Dr. George Demokopoulos, professor of theology at Fordham University. Popes maintained theoretical respect for imperial authority while practically asserting independence in religious matters. They leveraged Constantinople's desire for legitimacy and unity to secure concessions without surrendering ecclesiastical autonomy. This complex positioning became even more challenging when Eastern Emperor Justinian launched his ambitious reconquest of the Western territories, beginning in 535 CE. Pope Vigilius found himself caught between Justinian's attempts to dictate theological positions and the practical realities of a devastating Gothic war that reduced much of Italy to ruin. Vigilius's troubled pontificate, including his forced journey to Constantinople, capitulation to imperial demands followed by resistance, and death before returning to Rome, illustrated the papacy's vulnerability when caught between competing powers. Yet even this difficult period demonstrated institutional resilience, as the papacy maintained its essential functions despite the Pope's absence and the war's devastation.
What if everything you've been taught about happiness is wrong? We chase careers, approval, more stuff, hoping it'll finally make us feel fulfilled, but it never sticks. What if happiness isn't out there, but already inside you, just waiting to be unlocked? Discover the book, The Happiness Experiment. Every person has a unique happiness type, and when you understand yours, everything shifts. You'll stop chasing and start creating joy on your own terms. Discover your happiness type with a free happiness type assessment. Go to myhappinnesstype.com. That's myhappinesstype.com. It takes just a minute and it might change your life. Then grab your copy of The Happiness Experiment at Books A Million. This isn't just a book, it's a practical framework, a journey inward. It's a tool to help you reconnect with the happiness that's been waiting inside you all along. Pick up The Happiness Experiment and start your happiness experiment today.
As the 6th century progressed, the papacy increasingly developed authority mechanisms suited to a politically fragmented world. Without imperial infrastructure connecting distant regions, popes created alternative networks based on ecclesiastical structures, cultural influence, and spiritual authority. Pope Gregory, often called the Great, exemplifies this development. His pontificate created a template for effective papal leadership in the post-Roman world through several key innovations. Missionary strategy. Gregory dispatched organized missions to regions beyond former imperial boundaries, most famously sending Augustine to convert Anglo-Saxon England. These missions established direct relationships between newly converted areas and Rome, bypassing the declining metropolitan structure of the post-Roman Church. Practical governance. His pastoral rule provided practical guidance for bishops throughout Western Christianity, establishing standards for clerical conduct and administrative practice. This text created a shared governance approach despite political fragmentation. Cultural production. Gregory's writings, including homilies, biblical commentaries, and hagiographies, created intellectual frameworks that integrated classical learning with Christian theology in forms accessible to the post-Roman world. These works became foundational texts for medieval Christianity. Practical charity. When imperial systems for feeding Rome's population collapsed, Gregory organized church-based distribution networks that maintained essential services. This practical administration demonstrated the Church's capacity to perform functions previously managed by imperial authorities. Gregory's papacy marks the full emergence of a distinctive post-imperial papal model, notes Dr. Carol Straw, Professor Emerita of History at Mount Holyoke College. He combined traditional Roman administrative competence with scriptural authority, practical governance with spiritual leadership. This integration created a papacy capable of functioning effectively without imperial support, a truly post-Roman institution. This Gregorian synthesis created foundations for the medieval papacy's expanded role. By developing authority mechanisms independent of imperial structures, Gregory and his predecessors ensured the institution's survival and eventual flourishing despite the Western Empire's collapse. Their innovations transformed potential catastrophe into opportunity for ecclesiastical development. By the early 7th century, the barbarian popes had fundamentally reimagined their office for a post-Roman world. The institution they developed differed significantly from both its persecuted origins and its imperial phase, combining elements of both while adapting to new realities. From its persecuted period, the papacy maintained a sense of mission transcending political structures, a capacity to function without state support if necessary. From its imperial phase, it preserved administrative systems, cultural forms, and theoretical frameworks that enabled effective governance. To these foundations, the barbarian popes added diplomatic flexibility, cultural preservation functions, and authority mechanisms suited to political fragmentation. This transformed papacy would face further challenges: Islamic expansion, Frankish alliances, conflicts with Constantinople that would continue reshaping the institution throughout the early medieval period. But the foundations established during the immediate post-Roman transition enabled these subsequent adaptations by creating a papacy no longer dependent on imperial frameworks for its essential functioning. The barbarian popes demonstrate institutional resilience at its most impressive, the capacity to maintain core identity and functions despite radical external transformation. Their achievement in preserving not just the papacy itself, but substantial elements of Roman civilization would provide essential continuity between ancient and medieval worlds, making the Church the primary bridging institution across Europe's most significant cultural transition. White Smoke is a production of Calaroga Shark Media.
There's always something brewing behind palace walls, whether it's Prince Harry and Meghan Markle making headlines from afar, or Prince William and Princess Catherine quietly preparing for the future throne. I'm Mark Francis, and on Palace Intrigue, we cover every twist, turn, whisper, and wink. From royal drama to daily gossip, follow Palace Intrigue wherever you get your podcasts.
You can call me James. I spent 23 years designing aircraft that officially don't exist for agencies you think TV made up. Until I started asking the wrong questions. Navy ships are recording objects moving at impossible speeds. Infrastructure is failing in coordinated patterns. The moon looks smaller than it did 10 years ago. None of this is a coincidence. The official explanations don't add up. This is Paranormal Aliens, where we connect the dots they don't want connected. If you're hearing this, you know where to get podcasts. Follow Paranormal Aliens. New episodes weekly until they shut me down.